Home canning? That's something I'm definitely interested in. I'm just not sure how to get started.
Well, now that I have kids, I'm much more concerned, with the quality of the foods we're eating. So I check labels all the time for too much salt, too much sugar, preservatives. I suppose if I knew how to can.
Canning makes a lot of sense to me, especially with all the extra tomatoes I end up with. Guess it'd be great to can them and eat them this winter.
I've always been a big believer in home canning. It's really a wonderful way to preserve the fruits and the vegetables that we love so that we can savor them all year long. From the day I first opened the doors at Chez Panisse restaurant, I've been absolutely committed to finding and serving the very best tasting food possible. Naturally, this means using the best ingredients I can find. I've always felt that home canning goes hand in hand with this philosophy of food. It's wonderful to be able to select every single ingredient, the ripest fruit, the freshest and most alive vegetables, aromatic, delicate herbs. Finding the best food is essential to my cooking, and I believe in doing things the very simplest way.
A big reason why I have my own garden is so I know exactly what I'm eating.
You don't have to convince me that canning makes a lot of sense. But between the job and the kids, do I have time for this?
Home canning is really quite simple and well worth the time.
Okay, more control, better ingredients, better taste, and it's simple? I'll believe that when I see it.
Canning is especially easy to do once you've seen it done. It's really a matter of following a few basic steps, just as you would do in any recipe. Different cookbooks and recipes may mention different ways to can, with variations in preparation, processing, and so on. Just so you know, I have found that the methods of canning in this video are the safest and most successful.
Home canning is really easy. If I can do it, anybody can. Let's see, I've done tomatoes, peaches, dill pickles.
Corn relish?
Corn relish.
There are a couple of things you should understand before you get started. First of all, always start with a recipe tested for home canning. You may be surprised at all the delicious possibilities. Secondly, there are two basic methods of canning. The boiling water method, which uses a water bath canner, and the steam pressure method, which uses a pressure canner.
Oh, wait a second, you're losing me. How do I know which to do when?
It simply depends on the kind of food you want to can. Canning is basically a way of preserving food by preventing it from spoiling. By heating the jars of food hot enough and long enough, we can interrupt Mother Nature. Home canners divide foods into two groups, high acid and low acid.
Wait a minute. I've got this part down. Fruits, fruit spreads, tomatoes, and pickles are all high acid foods. Most vegetables, meats, poultry, and seafood are all low acid foods.
For high acid foods like spicy tomato salsa, a temperature of 212 degrees Fahrenheit is sufficient for safe preservation. A boiling water canner will maintain this temperature. On the other hand, low acid foods must be processed at a much higher temperature, and that's where the pressure canner comes in, because only a pressure canner will reach the necessary temperature of 240 degrees Fahrenheit. For both methods, how long you process the jars depends on the recipe. Where you live can make a difference too. I just got back from the Rocky Mountains, and in places like that, or in fact anywhere where the altitude is 1,000 feet above sea level or higher, the processing times for the boiling water method and the pounds of pressure for the steam pressure method need to be adjusted. Any good canning guide will have an altitude chart. As with any kind of cooking, you should prepare your work area before you get started. Read the recipe over a couple of times if necessary. Collect all your equipment. You probably have most of these things already. Use a special boiling water canner, or you can even use a large kettle, with a round cake rack in it. Just make sure that the jars fit easily inside and that there's a very tight lid on top.
You know, there are a lot of neat little gadgets like a jar lifter and a lid one that make the job a lot easier.
And I can find what I need where?
You can find that stuff at kitchen stores, department stores, even some grocery stores, and some mail order catalogs even carry canning supplies.
My aunt has boxes of old canning jars.
It's not a good idea to reuse commercial jars or lids or old-style canning jars. A variety of sizes and styles of canning jars are available today. These jars are reusable. Lids are not because of the sealing compound on them. Inspect every jar and lid carefully. If there are any cracks, nicks, or scratches in the jar, don't use it. This jar could break when you're filling or processing it. Always make sure that the sealing compound is intact and even. Check the band for the proper fit too. Wash and rinse them well. Dry the bands and set them aside. Both jars and lids need to be kept in the simmering water until they're used. Don't let the water come to the boil, and do remove the jars and lids one at a time. Of course, the ingredients you select should get careful consideration too. You should use fresh ingredients from your own garden, the farmer's market, or a grocery store. I'm a real advocate of organically grown produce. For spicy tomato salsa, we have tomatoes, dried chilies, fresh jalapeno chilies, onions, garlic, salt, vinegar, and cilantro. Everything is rinsed, chopped, measured out, and ready to mix. Leave the salt out if you wish, but don't make any other changes in the recipe because it could affect the results. Keep in mind that canning recipes have been thought out carefully and tested for you. Go ahead and combine all the ingredients in a saucepan. Bring this to a boil and let it cook for 10 minutes, stirring occasionally. Now, even though there are low-acid ingredients like onions and garlic, we can still use the boiling water method because the main ingredient is tomatoes, which are naturally acidic. Also, adding the right amount of vinegar sufficiently raises the overall pH level for this combination low and high acid recipe. An interesting and tasty variation of this salsa is roasted tomato salsa. There are directions for roasting the tomatoes and garlic, plus full preparation details and proper measurements in the enclosed recipe. Now, while the salsa is still hot, ladle some into a hot jar, leaving 1/4 inch headspace. Headspace is critical since the contents may expand during the processing. A good vacuum seal also depends on the correct amount of headspace, so do be very accurate. By the way, canning food that's heated first is called hot packing. When you can food that's still raw, it's called, simply enough, raw packing. Don't worry, every recipe will tell you what to do. Run your plastic spatula around the inside of the jar to release any air bubbles. Remember, don't use anything metallic like, say, a knife, because you don't want to scratch the glass. Wipe the rim and the threads of the jar with a clean, damp cloth. This helps ensure a good, firm seal. Take a hot lid and put it, sealing compound down, on the jar. This is when the lid wand is so handy. Screw the band on evenly and firmly, just until you feel resistance. The jar then goes into the canner where the water is simmering. Continue filling the rest of the jars one at a time. When you're done, make sure that the water covers the capped jars by at least 2 inches. Go ahead and add more boiling water if you need to. Down goes the lid. Bring the water to the boil, and only when it comes to the rolling boil do you begin counting the processing time, which is 15 minutes for this salsa recipe in pint jars.
I live in Denver, you know, the mile-high city. So how does that affect the processing time?
According to the altitude chart, Your time would be increased by 10 minutes for a total of 25 minutes. When it's time to remove the jars, set them upright on a towel to prevent any chance of the glass cracking. Don't retighten the bands. You could interfere with the seal that's forming. Just let the jars cool naturally for 12 to 24 hours. When they're cool, check the seals by pressing down on the center of the lids. After you've tested each jar, all that's left to do is to remove the band, clean the outside of the jar and lid, and label it. When you do reach for a canned good, this is true whether you've canned it yourself or you've bought it, play it safe by giving it a once-over. Check the seal, color, aroma. Your senses will guide you. Spicy tomato salsa is wonderful with tortilla chips or on the side of a grilled steak. It's also a great thing to give your friends something you made yourself. It makes me feel good to give a friend a jar of salsa made from tomatoes picked from our own garden. It's important to cook with ingredients that are fresh and plentiful and in season. Take green beans, for example. Nothing tastes better than tender young beans picked at their peak. That's the time to can them too. And again, it's quite easy to do with the steam pressure method. Once you've learned the steam pressure method, you'll enjoy more variety. You'll be able to put up lots of different things, from vegetables to sauces for pasta and pizza, and soups and ragouts. Naturally, you need a pressure canner. The one I like has a heavy, tight-fitting lid, a vent, and a weighted gauge. Yours may have a dial gauge, which is just fine. Just remember to check the dial gauge for accuracy before each canning season. Again, have your utensils ready and set out, the jars and the lids washed and heated. Your produce should be carefully sorted. A beautiful batch of green beans should be picked over and rinsed thoroughly. For the freshest flavor and best texture, always prepare 1 canner load of produce at a time. Boil the beans for 5 minutes. Check the size and tenderness. When that's done, drain them. Save the cooking liquid. You'll be using some of that later. Now take 1 jar out and set it on a towel. Add 1 teaspoon of salt to each quart jar. Remember, you can leave it out if you like. You can add a sprig of fresh dill or basil and a clove of garlic or 2 into some of the jars. Pack the hot beans in, leaving 1 inch of headspace. We're hot packing, not raw packing once again. Carefully ladle some of the hot cooking liquid over the beans. Or you can use just plain boiling water. Just make sure to leave 1 inch of headspace. Run the plastic spatula around the beans so that the air can escape. Repeat a couple of times. Wipe the rim off. Take a hot lid and put it, sealing compound down, on the jar. Screw the band down just until you feel resistance. Set the jar on the rack. Check to make sure there's 2 or 3 inches of simmering water in the canner. Then continue filling the rest of your jars. Lock the lid in place. Always double check it. Let the water come to the boil. Leave the vent open until a steady stream of steam flows for 10 continuous minutes. Then you can put the weight on the vent. Since we're at sea level, we'll bring the pressure to 10 pounds. Set the timer and leave the beans to process for 25 minutes for quart jars. At higher altitudes, remember to check the chart for the right adjustments. Also, different sized jars require different processing times. Another good reason to read the recipe more than once. Turn the heat off and let the pressure return to 0. Some things can't be rushed, and this is definitely one of those things. Wait 2 more minutes and only then open the vent. If you raise the lid away from yourself, you'll avoid a blast of steam. Let the jars rest 5 to 10 minutes longer. Now you can take the jars out. Set them upright on the towel to cool for 12 to 24 hours. And as with the salsa, check for a good tight seal. Remove the bands, clean the lid and the outside of the jar, then label and date each one. You can serve these green beans with a simple vinaigrette or as part of an antipasto platter. Home canned green beans are always nice to have in the pantry.
Well, I guess I'd always have something ready to serve. That would help me out a lot, you know, on the days that I have to work late.
Salsa and green beans are good ways to sample home canning. Really, there are so many other recipes you can try. Everyone loves homemade jams and jellies, and they look so brilliant and beautiful in their jars. Fruit spreads are very easy to can. You can start with something as basic as strawberry jam, and then move on to the more sophisticated tastes like golden apricot conserve. There are other sugarless recipes as well. Of course, there are pickles, relishes, and chutneys too. Canning is such a pleasurable and practical way to take advantage of the bounty of the summer. You can buy things when they cost the least and have the most flavor, and then you'll be able to provide your family and your friends with fruits and vegetables all year long. Like I said, when I go to the farmer's market, I let what looks the freshest and most irresistible inspire me. It's so easy and it's so satisfying to just reach into the cupboard for a jar of something really wonderful.
I'm very excited about trying home canning.
I can't wait to enjoy this food all winter long.
It's fun. It doesn't cost a lot of money. It's something you can do on the weekends.
Tastes
Anything
good.
else? It tastes good.